right, Ron, you want to go back to your house or?
Huh? Oh, I don't know where I finished up. I think my leaving my mobile home in St. Petersburg. And that was in 1990. I think I've covered up until then. Then 1990, I moved to Greencroft, and never been to Florida since then. Stayed pretty close to Greencroft. Mother, of course, was blind for 4 years while we lived there. We moved there in 1990, and she died in 1990. She died in '03, so she lived there 13 years, I guess. Blind for 4 years, totally blind, and up until then, I was stayed pretty much to Greencroft. I started doing a lot of volunteer work. I'd never done anything but played golf for 30 years. This is my retirement. Catherine did a lot of volunteer work. I used to gripe because I had to help her even. But she did considerable. In St. Petersburg, she did all they had 17, the city of St. Petersburg had 17 mobile homes that they used for people that were out of home temporarily because of fire or some other reason, didn't have a home. So they stayed in 17 mobile homes there. And the charities, the churches in Grand Rapids used to give all their clothes and things to these 17 homes, and they usually just throw them away. They didn't do anything with them, and so many of them went unused that were good. So Mother picked up all those clothes, sorted them out, took them around to secondhand stores and and flea markets, any place, and to get rid of all these extra clothes. And she gave $9,000 to build a warehouse of at this while she was working at this mobile home place. There were 17 houses there. $9,000 to that thing over the period of time from the clothes she picked up. Worked awful hard at it. She took it to 2 or 3 secondhand stores and went to flea markets, carrying boxes and things spreading out. She had help. She had 4 or 5 people that worked there with her, and they helped her at the flea markets. And they didn't help her at the stores. She did pretty much that by herself, and she did that for several years. Probably lived in Mobile Home, maybe the full 10 years. I don't know. Anyway, an awful lot of time was spent by her there volunteering until she didn't go blind until she moved to Greencroft. And then in 1990, we give up going every place except here at Greencroft. She did a lot of charity knitting for our church. She knitted for 4 or 5 years till she went blind. Well, even after she went blind, she was doing it. She knitted socks and afghans and things for our. We used to have gift days at Greencroft and she had a table there twice a year, I think it did, and at events at church that they'd have, she'd take her knitting in there, and she donated all that money that she made off of that knitting for as long as she did it, for probably 6 or 7 years, donated it all to our church.
So let me go back a little bit here and ask you some things. I want to see if you what you remember about them. The first is World War I. You were just a little boy. Do you remember World War I?
Very well, yeah. My father he never had to go, but he was drafted, and ended before he had to go. The big thing I remember about it, on the, what's that day they call it? Armistice Day? They had a big celebration down in Bloomington, a neighboring town to Normal. And I remember my father took me down there, and I was very uncomfortable with all the cannons and things going off. I remember it wasn't too comfortable an evening for me. Anyway, he took us down there. The big celebration at the town square. That was the county seat in the town square. The Armistice Day night, shortly after, whenever we were celebrating, November when we were celebrating the Armistice Day. And that's what I remember of World War I.
Was there family members, anybody, relatives, people in town that you know that went? Or?
Not that I know of. No, my dad was be the nearest. I don't remember. And my dad wasn't very close to his brothers and sisters. I don't think I ever saw any of them, really. So I don't know what happened to their children and so forth. I know my mother's brother. I don't think he had to go. He was a doctor. I don't think he went in the First World War. So I don't know anybody close that was in the First World War. I remember a lot of funerals of guys coming back in Normal, and funerals of guys killed in the war.
Did you talk about it at school? Did they?
Well, yeah, oh yeah, they talked about it at school, yeah, and we used to have certain things we give to the I forget who it was, the Salvation Army or somebody went to the soldiers for the war. They used to have times that we give gifts in school. Yeah, it was talked about, yeah. Of course, it was a big subject, I'm sure. I don't remember any particular program or anything. I don't remember going to any celebrations or anything from World War I, but of course it was well talked about, and I was worried that my father was going to have to go into service, but he never did. Something happened. He got out of the service. He was drafted, I think, but never went in. Never was called. So that was a pleasant thing, that to have him not have to go to war.
Now, did he just, your father, did he just run the farm? What was his, what did he do for a living? What did your father do for a living?
My father at that time of the First World War,
yeah.
He was a carpenter in Normal. We weren't on the farm.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
We were living down in Normal.
Uh-huh.
And he was a carpenter. He's a carpenter.
What kind of things did he do? Do you know?
Huh?
You know what kind of things he built? Or
houses mostly. Houses. Yeah. He worked for a contractor that contracted, and he worked some. I remember one winter while I was there, he was gone considerable time. He worked in a church in Chinoa, a town about 10 or 15 miles away, and he'd stay up there all week long and then come home just a weekend. But he worked on a church up there that his contractor had a bid in, did the carpentry work in the church, but he didn't contract. He was just worked for a contractor, and not too steady. Of course, there's a lot of times in the wintertime when he couldn't work, and although he made pretty good money for that time of year, he made $1 an hour, but there's a lot of times that he was off work and didn't work too steady, especially in the winter. So it was not a very fluent life.
Is that why he moved to the farm?
Yeah, and it was even worse. Even worse. That farm that we bought, Dad was used to living there in Illinois, where all those farmers with one of the most fertile parts of land in the country, I guess, down through central Illinois, central Iowa, and central Ohio. And he was used to those type of farmers. We moved up to this farm in Michigan. It would have been a better sand pile than it would a beach pile than it would a farm. Very sandy land, very poor, fertile, very not fertile at all. And we had a struggle getting enough money from our crops and so forth to live. So my life was lived very almost poverty conditions, but it wasn't unusual. A lot of people lived the same. Very few people in town, of course, all had that, but many of the farmers lived just as frugally as we did. No inside water, no inside toilets, no plumbing, nothing. Many of the farmers, not very many of the farmers had inside water facilities. So it was living like everybody in our neighborhood did.
You remember at all as a child what you wanted to be when you grew up? Or you think
Never had any, never, no, I just kind of always just kind of thought I'd go into a business like I did and stay with it, and probably with no college education, I'd probably had to start any place in a pretty low position. And with Sears, I did about as well as I could do, I guess, for my abilities. As I say, I never got to be store manager, which was a big store manager made the big money. $25,000-$30,000 a year was a big salary at that time. I think most I ever made was $12,000-$15,000. I think I retired. I was only making about $15,000 a year. So my kids, I don't think I contributed very much to their college education. They pretty much did it on their own. I think most of them borrowed money. He lived on some borrowed money, but I give them very little help. They did most of it. Most of them worked their way through college. Gene, of course, never graduated from college, but your mother did, and your mother did, and well, all the rest of them did, yeah. Except Gene. Gene's the only one that didn't have a college graduation, I guess. Your mother worked awful hard, and she worked a split deal. She didn't go straight through in 4 years, I don't think. I think she split. And some years she was out earning money to get back in college, but she finally graduated from state, I guess. And of course, your dad is a graduated state.
Do you remember when you were going to school as a little boy, do you remember what punishment was like? How kids get in trouble, and is it different from today?
Yeah, I got in trouble. I used to have to go to the superintendent. I had a rubber hose they'd spank you on the legs with. I remember I had to go to this principal's office a couple of times.
Remember what you got in trouble for?
Probably talking or throwing spitballs or something like that.
Do that, and they would
Sassing the teacher, or not studying. Well, they wouldn't get you for not studying, but usually a misdemeanor. Prankish things I would do, I guess.
So they would take a rubber hose and hit your legs?
Yeah,
How
yeah.
old would you have been?
Principal, teachers never did it. I was 10. I was 10 years old, and I left. I was in the 4th grade, I think. Yeah, I was in the 4th grade when I left, and the 4th grade teacher and I really never got. I think that's the only time I went to the principal was under her. She never liked me very well, I guess. I got punished for her from several times, and she made me change my writing from left-handed to right-handed. That's the reason I probably had trouble all my life. I think they don't do that anymore, but they did then. And she made me change from, that was pretty old to make the change too, 4th grade. I went 3 grades writing with my left hand, and then the 4th grade she made me make that change. It wasn't good for my mental health, I'm sure. Handicapped me somewhat.
What kind of games did the kids play at school? Do you remember?
Recess?
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, we had
Sports?
sports, swings, slides, swings and slides mostly, playing tag, and I guess mostly using the swings and the slides and merry-go-round, sort of merry-go-round type of thing. Anyway, they had some appliances there for recess every day, twice a day, morning and afternoon. And that was mostly the games we played, I guess. Girls and boys mostly separated. Baseball, I mean, we played some baseball, I guess, during recess. I forget if recess was a half an hour or 15 minutes. Recess time, twice a day.
Do you remember your grandfather or grandmother much?
Oh, my mother's father and mother, we were very close to them. We lived within 5 or 6 blocks from them, so I saw them quite regularly, yeah. And I remember John and I, one day a week, my grandmother and grandfather used to have us come to their house for lunch. Instead of going home for lunch, we'd go to their house for lunch, both John and I.
What were your brothers and sisters?
Huh?
Go through do you know all your brothers and sisters, what year they were born? Who's the oldest?
I am. I am. John's 2 years younger than I am. Huh?
You were born in 1910?
1910. John was born in 1912. Virginia was born 1912. 16, I think, and Ralph was born 15 months later. Ralph was born about 1917, but we were all born in the same house, except Robert. Robert was born 15 years later. I was 15 years old when he was born. So he was born, I don't know. Well, I was 15 years old, so he was born 15, yeah, I would be, 25, yeah. Yep.
So you and John would go over to your grandparents' house?
Huh?
You and John would go over to your grandparents' house?
Yeah, for once a week for lunch, yeah.
What day of the week?
I used to go on Wednesday, I think John on Thursday. Yeah, for several years, we always went to Grandpa's for lunch. They had us for lunch.
And that was on a school day?
Yeah, school day lunch, Wednesday and Thursday, yeah. Yeah.
You get out of school and go to lunch and...
Huh?
So you get out of school and go to lunch and go visit your...
Yeah, we always ate at home. I never carried my lunch in school. We always went home to lunch, and then Grandpa's and Grandma's on Wednesday. One day a week. But
what do you remember about them? What did your grandpa do for a living?
Huh?
What did your grandpa do for a living?
Nothing. He was retired from. He was retired Methodist Episcopal Church. He was a minister all his life until he retired. He retired early with some sort of a nervous condition he had. So he retired early, and then he had about 2 or 3 acres, I think, and he'd done a lot of gardening and farming and selling produce in his retirement years, and that's how he subsidized his. Of course, he got a pension. He worked long enough as a minister to have a pension. He had a pretty good pension, and then he had a pension from the Army. He lied about his age and went into the Civil War when he was 16.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. So he, as I remember, his last pension was $75 a month, and that was a pretty good part of his later living. $75 a month wasn't bad at that time.
Do you know anything he did in the Civil War?
Not much. I don't think he ever got into any battles. Mostly, the Civil War ended shortly after he got in, I think. So I don't think he ever got in any real any of the big battles.
You know what general he fought under? Anything about?
No, I don't. I'm not familiar with that, and I'm not familiar just how long he was in, but I don't think too long. Anyway, he was never with any Grants or Lees. Grant, well, he was north, of course. My other grandfather bought his way out. You could buy your way out.
By a substitute? Or?
Yeah. Yeah. So my other grandfather bought his way out of the Army. He never went. Huh? Orville, my dad's father.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you see him much? Or?
Huh?
Did you see your dad's father much?
Well, no, I didn't see him. He was he was 20 years older than his wife. He didn't get married till he was 40. He was a doctor, and he had a circuit around, and he was a doctor when he met my grandmother. He was around 39 or 40 years old. He was a doctor when when my grandmother's sister was born. And that's where he met my grandmother, doctoring his mother's sister for childbirth. And she was 20 and he was 40 when he was married, before he was married. So he was considerably older than my father. There was 5 members of my family, and he was 12 years old, 12 years younger than his sister. He was come along 12 years after his last sister was born. His brother was 16 or 17 years old when he was born. So I never knew. I never knew him I guess I never knew him at all. He died around 1995, 1905 or 6, I think. I was born 10. And I died, he was later than that, because I was just a baby when, after he died, my mother, we lived in my grandmother's house. We moved into my grandmother's house, and I died in my grandmother's arms. She died suddenly, just sitting holding me.
Your grandmother?
Yeah,
my grandmother on your
dad's side. Yeah.
She was holding you,
and she died. Yeah, right in the chair. Huh?
You know what she died of? Or?
Heart attack, I suppose. Yeah. I suppose a heart attack, because it was suddenly my mother looked up and saw that she was gone, and she was holding me at that time. So that's probably a heart attack then, certainly.
Heart attack or a stroke are probably
Yeah, she died right there in the chair. Yeah. My grandfather lingered on she probably was bedfast for 7 or 8 months, and he was out of it. In a kind of a coma, huh?
It's your mother's dad.
My father's dad. My father's dad, yeah.
Father's dad died before you were born.
Just shortly, yeah. It must have been 1908 or 9, because I was just a baby when she held me, and she lived not too long after. She lived long enough to take care of her husband until he died. He died right there in the house. Died bedfast. Had to have diapers. Well, he was in a coma, I guess. I suppose several months before he finally died. But my grandmother took care of him right there at the house. I was probably 8 or 9, not too much longer, because I couldn't have been too old. When my grandmother died, I couldn't have been too old if I was in her arms when she died. I must have been a small child, probably 1911 maybe. Not even probably under a year old, I imagine. But she took care of her husband until he was gone. And she, in the last years, my grandfather, I guess, wasn't too wealthy, although he was a circuit doctor, because she took in, there's a university there. She took in university students, 2 or 3 of them, all during the school year, I remember. Fed them and had a room for them, 2 or 3 girls, I think. And she did that for several years, so she helped with the, I don't think my grandfather died with very much money, grandmother. He had a runaway when he was, horses run away, and it damaged him somewhat, and he never was quite normal since then. Several years. He died in his 80s, and I guess he was in his 70s when the runaway happened. Damaged his head.
Do you remember Prohibition and that starting?
Oh yeah, very well, yeah. Yeah, I remember we used to make gin in the bath. I was in Chicago when it happened. We used to make our gin in the bathtub.
You would have been how old at the time?
Huh?
How old?
1920.
1920.
Yeah.
So it's towards the end of Prohibition, maybe.
Huh?
Prohibition began in what, 1920?
Yeah, and it didn't last too long. I forget when it was over. I remember when it was over. At first, there wasn't many saloons around. They just served beer and so forth. But then they got back to the regular saloons again. And I remember in my young years at home, there was always 2 or 3 saloons in the town. And my mother was always pool halls too. My mother would never let us children go to pool halls. Even when we moved up to Cassopolis, a lot of my friends and so forth would always go to the pool hall and play pool, but I was never allowed in the pool halls. I think we had 3 in town.
So you remember when they finally repealed Prohibition?
Yeah, oh sure, yeah.
It's been 23.
It didn't last too long, and I forget when it was. I remember Al Capone very well in Chicago, and people used to say, "Do you live in Chicago with Al Capone?" Well, when I lived in Chicago, I never even heard of the guy hardly. Never. I think I may have seen him once, but there used to be so much talk about Al Capone that they asked me if I wasn't afraid to live in Chicago. People when I'd come back to Cass. But I never even heard of the guy much. He was very active, of course, in Chicago. I remember the St. Valentine's Day massacre, the big St. Valentine's Day massacre. And he was, of course, I hear a lot about it in the paper. He was quite active, very active. In fact, he owned a hotel out on 22nd Street that belonged to Al Capone. That's where he had his headquarters, 22nd and State, 22nd and State, Metropole Hotel, I think it was. That was his Capone headquarters. And he was, of course, quite active there. And when we lived out on 89th Street, one of Al Capone's, I forget the guy's name, one of his close associates, his mother lived in a house not 2 or 3 doors from us. He was an active Capone Confederate. I never saw the guy, but we knew, of course, my wife knew his mother. She'd be in the yard there together with Catherine when we lived. That was out on 89th Street, 89th and Cottage Grove.
Do you remember, did a lot of people brew their own?
What?
Did a lot of people, bathtub, or what did they?
Oh yeah, and remember of course during Prohibition, there's a lot of speakeasies, what they call speakeasies. They were, well, they were comparatively open. They were paying off the cops, of course, but right in my apartment building where I lived, on the first floor, there was a speakeasy. Well, well, it was they had a bar in there, and you had to be known to get in there. You couldn't get in. Everybody couldn't get in. If they thought they'd report them to a cop or something, they were paid off by the cops, I'm sure. All the speakeasies were paid off, but there's many of those in town.
Right.
Many of those. What they call them, speakeasies. I don't think I was ever in a speakeasy, even though there was one in our building. I don't think I was ever in it. And we never had any confusion or drunken orgies in there. That it was always you hardly knew it was there. It was on the first floor though, but it was very civil. It wasn't. There's never any problems there. Didn't even hardly know it was there. But they were all over town, the what they call speakeasies.
You remember when you first got a radio, how old were you? Did you say you were?
Oh, I expect about 14.
14. Do you remember what was on? Do you remember any radio shows that were?
Yeah, WLS, Chicago. WLS was the farm station, belonged to Sears Roebuck, belonged to Sears. They had a Saturday. They were on every Saturday night. They had, barn dance. They called it the barn dance, and they were on. And I think WGN. And yeah, we used to listen to the Cubs, so I think it was WGN had it on. We used to listen to the Cubs during the day, but only one could listen because we only had earphones. That little crystal set wasn't very loud, and you had to have earphones also. Well, sometimes we'd split the earphone. A couple of us would get on, I guess, for Cub games or stuff. There was a couple of other stations. I think WBBM or WGN, probably 3 or 4 different stations. And then the WLS belonged to Sears.
Did they play music? Did you hear?
Huh?
Did you hear music? What did they play?
Oh, they played music. Yeah, they had music and programs. They had the barn dance. My mother used to listen to it every Saturday night. I remember it'd come on early in the evening every Saturday night, and she used to know there were several prominent characters. I forget their names now, but they were very prominent at that time. It was a very, very prominent program, mostly, I suppose, for farmers program. My mother used to listen to it.
When did the celebrities come about?
Huh?
Celebrities were like what? W.C. Fields and Al Jolson.
Al Joe. All those guys come along later. I don't remember any comedians way back in 1914. I don't remember. Jolson and all those come along later. Benny Goodman, Jack Benny, Bob Hope, and all of them, all those guys. Huh?
Those guys, Jack Benny and Bob Hope, were kind of World War II.
Yeah, and that's Milton Berle, Jack Benny, and Bob Hope, and all those guys. They come on. Yeah, they were 40s or 45. I don't remember any comedians real early.
Do you remember when the first dramas came out? Things like.
They used to have dramas. WGN had them, of course. There were 3 or 4 radio stations that we could get on that little thing. Well, I remember mostly ball games, and I think they were on WGN. I forget the announcer, but he was on WGN for years. The Cubs broadcaster. So I remember we used to listen to mostly Cub games. I forget the guy's name, but he was an announcer for the Cubs for many, many years. And then between the well, between probably 15 to 25, 15 to 25. I forget the guy's name. He was many years with I think it was WGN. He used to broadcast the Cubs game. But they were on, yeah, they were on, as I remember, for many years. But and they had some dramas, I remember, and then the Saturday night barn dance that was, I forget the character, but there's several characters on there that were pretty well-known names. I forget any of the names right now.
Did you,
huh?
Did the kids have any, did you have any heroes as a child, you know? Like, baseball players?
No. Any, Hack Wilson, I think, with the Cubs, yeah. Hack Wilson, probably. Pee Wee Harris, Pee Wee Reese, a Cubs player. And, of course, the first baseman was quite prominent. I forget his name now, the Cubs first baseman. He was first baseman for many years, and then he was finally manager at the end of his career. He managed the Cubs, I believe, and I can't remember his name. But I guess I don't remember any war heroes. Any other guys were particular here? Maybe
generals from the World War I.
No.
Remember?
Yeah, of course. Well, World War One. Well, that was a Civil War. Grant and Lee were the generals to remember. Meade. I remember several from the Civil War, but I can't remember in the First World War any of the generals. I can't remember them. Oh well, of course, Foch wasn't Foch a general in the Second World War, the big general, or was he the French general? Who was the head of the First World War civil? I can't remember his name even.
I don't know the First World War very well.
Well, no, but you'd remember. I think you. Well, I don't remember his name. If I don't know, I expect you to. But I thought he was a pretty. Gosh, I should remember that name.
What about the president? Did kids look up to the president when you were a kid?
First one I remember is, I guess, Wilson. President Wilson, I remember him.
Remember anything about him?
No, only that he was not very poor health in his latter years, and he was pretty well dominated by others before he retired. He was pretty well out of it himself, but was still president. And of course, FDR, everybody remembers him with his four terms. I remember, I think didn't he come in after Wilson? I think he did. No, Hoover, yeah. Hoover, of course, yeah. Harold Hoover and Roosevelt. Roosevelt followed Hoover, yeah. Hoover was in, yeah. Hoover was in until 1930, I guess, and Roosevelt came in 1930, I believe. He defeated Hoover.
Right.
Yep.
What about, do you remember Charles Lindbergh?
Oh yeah, sure. First guy, yeah. I remember Charles Lindbergh. He was quite famous in America First, as was the head of Sears Roebuck, America First Club, the club that was against getting into the Second World War. They were definitely against getting into it, as well as Joe Kennedy was. Joe Kennedy got fired by FDR, because he didn't want to get into the World War. He was secretary of, he was British envoy to Great Britain, and Roosevelt fired him because he didn't want to. He argued with him on World War. He didn't want to get into World War, and he was quite active then in what they called America First. Charles Lindbergh, the head of Sears Roebuck,
You remember the day of the flight and where you were? And
Yeah. I
you heard
remember.
about it?
I remember when I remember the day that the first flight around the world, the World War flight, and they flew right over our farm. I remember.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, that was the first. That was quite a famous flight. They flew I don't know whether it was nonstop. It was the first round the world flight.
Probably not nonstop.
Yeah, nonstop, I guess.
Day.
Yeah, and they flew right over. I remember they were headed for it. We knew about it by radio at that time, and they flew. I guess it was by radio. I can't remember what date that was, but I remember the flight flew over our farm. Yep.
What, do you know anything about your birth? Were you born in a hospital or?
I was the only one born in the hospital. All the rest of the children were born at home.
You were born where?
At Brokaw Hospital in Normal, Illinois. Bloomington. No, the hospital was in Bloomington. We lived in Normal. They were they were two towns right together, Bloomington and Normal. I think Brokaw Hospital was in Bloomington, but I was born in the hospital for some reason or other, but all the rest of the children, I remember the room they were born. They're all born in the same room, in the same house. All four of us. Robert was the only one who was born. Well, he was born after we were up to the farm. I was 15 years old then when he was born. But all the rest of us were born in the same, in one house. All three children. I was born in the hospital. The other three born in the same room at home. Yep. Of course, I guess I don't remember when John was born, but I remember when Virginia and Ralph were born.
What was that like? Did they have a midwife come in, or how?
No, the doctor lived right across the street. It was the same doctor. He was a friend of the family, Dr. McCormick, and he was doctor to all four of us children, same doctor, and he was Dad knew him. Of course, Dad he lived right back of us, our house there on Ash Street, and Dad and Mother knew him very well, and he was their physician. Yep.
When did you first see an airplane?
Huh?
When did you first see an airplane?
Gosh, I can't remember. They used to have airplanes come out to a farm. They used to have an airplane day when a lot of airplanes came in, private planes and all acrobatic stunts and everything. And I didn't have enough money to get in. I was sitting on the fence outside of when the girl was supposed to come down the parachute, and she flew right over us, and she was hanging on the wing, and she dropped in the field right next to it. She fell to her death. Something happened to the parachute. She didn't get in it right. And I remember when she was flying over us, she was hanging onto the wing, and then in the next field, she dropped to her death. Not a very pleasant incident.
How old were you then?
Oh, I imagine 10, 12, something like that. Yeah, 14 maybe.
Did you ever ride in an airplane?
No, Catherine did. Catherine used to ride in an airplane, but I don't think I ever did. I never had enough. Not that I was particularly afraid to ride in them, I guess, but I just never had the money to do it. It used to cost money. Those planes used to take customers up just to make money, and I never had the fare to do it, so I never flew in them.
I guess while you were a child, the women got the right to vote.
Yep, women's rights. Yeah, I can't remember when that was.
Do you remember your mother getting excited about that, or?
Oh yeah, my mother. Yeah, my mother was very glad to be able to vote, and I forget where we lived when she had that right. You remember what year that was?
You know, for some reason, I think it was like 1919 or something.
1919, of course, I'd be living still in Normal. When they got the rights, but I remember very well when she got the rights, she was so happy to be able to vote. But I don't remember what year it was, and that was when we were living in our second house in Normal yet, because we didn't move to the farm until 1920. So she would have voted there down in Normal, I'm sure. But she was there at the first vote. Very anxious to. Huh?
For a lot of countries and a lot of families, that was kind of a contentious moment, whether the women should have the right to vote. Do you remember?
I don't remember anybody having a particular argument about it. I remember my mother, though, being particularly happy. But outside of that, I don't remember any against or fors being an issue at that time. But I guess there was. I guess there was a lot of people who were against that, and a lot of. But I guess it passed by Constitution, didn't it?
Right. Is it
by amendment.
Yeah.
Not what's the number of the amendment? There's a number to the amendment, but I can't remember what number it was. I guess the only numbers I remember is the prohibition numbers. 1924 to 1929, was it? Or short, very short amendment. In and out. Didn't last long. I guess that's the only amendment was repealed. I don't know whether any other amendments or amendments are repealed or not, but that was repealed and pretty quick. But in and out, I remember both of them.
How would you describe the differences between the world you grew up in as a child and as the world it is today?
Oh, great difference, especially in religion. My religion was very strict when I was a child. I had to stay dressed up all day Sunday. We couldn't play any games. I couldn't play any baseball. I couldn't do anything. I was, well, not many of the children did. Some of my Catholic friends, of course, were not so restricted on Sunday, but we were very restricted on Sunday. That was a bad day for kids.
Yeah, you were what religion was it?
Methodist religion, Methodist church, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Sunday you'd have to get up and...
I had to go to church, and so my father wasn't too active in church. Well, he couldn't hear good. My father was a 7th-month child, born in 7 months, and he was deaf all of his life. He never heard a bird sing all of his life long. He couldn't hear light sound, and he couldn't hear in church, so he didn't go to church too often. In fact, my father, I think, was an agnostic when he died. I don't believe he believed in much in life after death. His mother was a very religious woman, and his father, I didn't think, his father never went to church, but he wrote a letter to his daughter when she asked him about his religion, and his answer was very much of a believer in Jesus Christ. So he wrote a letter to her telling about his belief, but people thought he was sort of an agnostic or non-believer. But the letter he wrote to his daughter when she asked him, his daughter was a minister's wife, and she wrote asking his father his letter. Someplace in the family that letter is still available. I remember seeing it many times, and either your mother has it or David has it. I hope that didn't get lost because it was a very memorable letter telling about his religion when everybody thought probably he was an agnostic or atheist even.
Who are you talking about there? Your father?
Huh?
You're talking about your father?
My grandfather.
My
grandfather, yeah.
On which side? Grandfather on which side?
My father's side. My grandfather, my father's one that was a doctor. He never went to church. His wife, as I say, was very, very religious, a Methodist, and always very active in church Well, the Methodist church was right across the street from our house. My mother played the pipe organ there. She was an organist. And that was before the days they had electricity. They used to have to pump the organ to get the sound. Had a guy to pump it. I remember when my mother used to go over and practice. She used to take us kids with us. She didn't want to be in the church all alone. But at that time, they had electric pump. But I remember when they used to have hand pumps for organists. Anyway, we all thought that letter was a very, very important letter, and someplace in the family it has. I hope it hasn't got lost. I hope your mother or David's got it, because it's a very fine letter, and surprising an awful lot of people, I'm sure.
So what more was different when you were a child than
What?
it is today? So what else is different? So the religion Sunday you would...
Religious was very, 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 very noticeable, and well, everything was noticeable. We never. That was just when the movies first started. I remember they used to be very crude type of movies. I remember when the first one started, they're normal. I didn't get to go. It used to be 5 cents to get into the movies, and I forget what, Mary Pickford, I suppose, and that sort of thing. But they were very, very crude movies, as I remember it.
Do you remember Charlie Chaplin?
Yeah, I don't know as we were pretty poor, and I never got to, we were very poor. We were very poor. We didn't do very much out of the games that we played for ourselves. Sousa, I remember, used to have concerts in Bloomington. A lot of the school children were given days off to go and hear Sousa's band. When Sousa was playing concerts around the country. But I never got to go because we never had the money for me to go. So I was among a lot of the children that we had very little of the things that we have today. Very few. We were one of the very few people that had a car. That was bought in 1914, before we moved over to the second house. We owned a car in 1914. Very few people had a car at that time, but we lived very, very much more simple lives than kids do today. They do a lot more things because there's more fluency. A lot more fluency than there was in those days. Of course, there wasn't any of the. There was, as I say, the movies didn't come till I was, I guess, 4 or 5 years old, and very little that we did besides what our children, my kid neighbors, did for ourselves all day long. Did very little. We never had enough money to go to the ball games. We always used to come in under the bleachers to watch kind of sneak in the side to go to the football games, or the university was right there in Normal, Illinois State Normal University. They had a football team, and so both the high schools had a football team. And we used to, little children used to, I lived right across the street from the campus. We used to sneak in the back way and get to watch the games from under the bleachers, as I remembered. I remember one time I picked up a cigar and started smoking, got awful, throw up being sick from sucking on that cigar. I picked up somebody's cigar that they dropped through the bleachers, started blowing on it, and I got awful sick. And my brother, one time we were running home. It was late, kind of late in the evening after dinner and after the game, and I remember my brother run into a wire fence, but running into right with his neck, and pretty near choked him to death. But I guess he got up and run home, but run right into his neck, and a pretty scary incident.
You could injure yourself down there, I guess.
Huh?
Probably wouldn't choke, but you injure your.
Yeah, there's one that didn't injure him because we were running pretty fast, and it was just the right height for him. He was a little shorter than me or something. Anyway, I didn't get into it, but he ran into that thing and made it a very scary incident. As I remember, he was choking quite badly, but I guess there was no permanent disease. If it injured him somewhat then, he never suffered later for it. It healed all right, but it was pretty scary and pretty dangerous at the time. One didn't he? I don't remember if it ever cut. I think it just kind of choked him.
Do you remember? Did you have visits to the dentist or dental care? What was that?
No regular dental care. We didn't go regular to the dentist, and I don't think I ever went to the dentist. I don't think.
Did you ever have cavity or have teeth pulled?
No, I don't think I had any cavities. Even after I moved up to Cassalpas, I don't believe the first incident I remember, I had my molars pulled out, but that was when I was working in Chicago. I was 19 or 20 years old. My molars.
Is that your wisdom teeth or?
Huh? Wisdom teeth, yeah, wisdom teeth. They got in the way or somewhere. They were cramping my other teeth. Anyway, whether they got to aching or what. Anyway, I went and had my 2 wisdom teeth pulled.
You remember what that was like? Did they just reach in with pliers?
No, I didn't. I don't think it caused me any problems at all. David had terrible problems. He had his pulled, and he had to go under anesthetic to have him pulled out. And I remember that night they got to bleeding, and we had to go to the dentist. We called the dentist at home, and we had to go into his office in the middle of the night to stop the hemorrhaging in his teeth. So he had considerable trouble with his wisdom teeth, and he went under anesthetic. I think I just had Novocaine when I had my wisdom teeth pulled, but his were in crossways, as I remember, sideways. I don't think they come in wrong anyway. He had they give him full anesthetic, but they give it to him right in the dentist's office. He didn't go to the hospital, and they give him full anesthetic, pulled him out. And I remember that night or the next night. It might not have been the first night. But anyway, it got to bleeding in the middle of the night, and we had to call a dentist to come in and stop it.
What about the doctor? Was there doctor visits when you were a kid?
Very few. I can't remember any particular. I guess the first incident with the doctor, and that of course wasn't for me, would be my brother and sister when they had the flu. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably the first incident they ever had with the doctor. We never had any regular appointment schedules or anything. You went to the hospital. I never was in the hospital. I had my tonsils out when I was 16. Then I stayed overnight in the hospital, I think. And then John had a broken appendix, and he got peritonitis and very nearly died. And he was in the hospital in Cassopolis for, probably a week, 10 days or more, I imagine. They finally got control of it so that he lived through it. But he got peritonitis. That's an occasion we never went to the doctor. He had this stomach ache for 2 or 3 days. It was appendicitis, and we never even knew it. And finally it got so bad, and by the time they got him in there, the appendix was broken and caused poison to go into his peritonitis. So he come very close to dying with that. I guess most people did die with what do they call ptomaine? I don't know what kind of poison. Anyway, the poisonous you get from when your appendix breaks.
Yeah,
Most people died at that time.
They have sulfa drugs then?
I don't know whether he got sulfur or not. I don't remember what they give. Anyway, he had quite a siege with it. We thought for quite a few days they weren't going to save him, but he finally revived and pulled through the thing. But that's a reason. That's just one thing to show how often we went to the doctor. He was 2 or 3 days before we even took him in.